All right, y'all. Welcome back for another episode of TruTalks. If you are new here and tuning in for the first time, I'm the creator and host of TruTalks. Today is a great day to tune in because we haven't been long going video, so you can see me. This is becoming more of a visual presentation. So if you've joined me on YouTube, kudos to you, but you have the ability to go back and listen to previous episodes from this season through all of the audio streaming platforms like Spotify, Anchor, SoundCloud, iTunes, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Wherever you listen to your audio creative material, you can find True Talks. But thank you for joining me. To those of you who have been coming here, thank you for continuously coming back for a new episode every Friday. Today, guys, we're switching gears a little bit. We're going to move forward with something that I've had planned for a while now, which is dealing with Metro Waters and educating my audience about what all goes into the flow of our water system, as well as keeping our water clean. And so by the end of this, my hope is that you all feel very secure in drinking our water and using our water that is in our businesses and in our homes. And so I have someone joining me today from Metro Waters by the name of Sonia, Allman. She's going to tell you a little bit about what she does, and she's also going to, walk us through the history of water here in general and what all goes into it. And so this will be a serial thing. So every month we'll come back to you guys with a new episode addressing a new topic around our water system. Today we're going to focus on the history of it and our filtration process. And so I'm going to open the floor for her to really introduce herself to you all, as well as, answer some of my questions and give us a great detail about where we're at today.
Sounds good. And thank you so much for having me. I am Sonia Allman. I am the manager of strategic communications at Metro Water Services. My degree is in biology, and my passions are biology and the environment and clearly water. So I have been at Metro Water Services since 2002. So I've been here a while. I've seen a lot, and I've really dug into our history quite a bit. And it's quite intriguing when you think about the history of water, because water is a vital resource, as we all know. And water is really the reason why Nashville is here, because of the Cumberland River and, why the forts were built and why our settlers came here. But Nashville didn't really have a true water system until about 1826. In 1826, they built a pump on the bluff, which was at the time Spring Street. It's now known as Church Street. And they carried water to essentially a large cistern in the town square. That water was used some for drinking, but it was mainly for fire protection. We had a lot of wood buildings. Everybody used fireplaces and coal, oil lamps and coal. So fire was one of their big risks. And that cistern that they pumped the water to was really for fire protection. Ironically enough, the pumping station at the bluff actually burned in March of 1830. So beginning March 9th of 1830, the residents of Nashville had to go back to carrying water in buckets or getting water brought to them by horse and buggy or wagon. So they would buy a barrel of water. That clearly is not very efficient. You need a lot of water when you start thinking about bathing kids and everyday purposes. So in 1833, a new water system was built. And this water system was much larger. It was where the old General Hospital is, what we now know as Rolling Mill Hill. We had a pump on the bluff, pumping water out of the Cumberland River into a much larger reservoir. So that was a relatively elevated location. The water would go from gravity down to the residences, but it was just plain river water. There was no disinfection, there was no treatment, there was no testing. So the water came from the river, was stored in this reservoir, and then went down to the property owners. As many people know, we had a huge cholera outbreak in the mid-1800s, and in 1873, over 750 residents died in Nashville in less than a month. And they really started looking at the cause of this cholera and the diseases that Nashville and other places were facing, and realized that it was due to the lack of water filtration. And they needed a much cleaner and actually a much larger water capacity. So Nashville was growing, we had more people coming, so they began looking at plans, and they built two facilities. One was the George Ryer pumping station, and the other was the 8th Avenue Reservoir. So the George Ryer pumping station is actually along the Cumberland River, directly across from Shelby Park. So it's off of Fessler's Lane, And that pumped water out of the river, and it was carried through about 4 miles of cast iron pipe to the 8th Avenue Reservoir, which is a 51 million gallon reservoir. This reservoir is split into 2 pieces. It has one basin where they would allow the water to settle. And then once the water settled and all of the mud settled out, they would carry it to the other basin, which was our drinking water. So again, there was no treatment other than allowing it to settle. So this was, again, the water source for many years. The George Ryer Pumping Station and the 8th Avenue Reservoir are still in service today. So, that is what we consider truly our original water system. In 1889, that's our current water system. And all it allowed for was settling. Again, there were no regulations, there was no testing, but people were able to have what they would consider at the time running water. In 1908, we began chemical treatment. So in 1908, we began adding hypochlorite of lime as a disinfectant, and that was added to the reservoir using a rowboat. So they would have a burlap bag behind the rowboat, they would row the boat around, and this hypochlorite of lime would dissolve into the water, and that was treatment. Not until 1920 did we begin using chlorine to disinfect the water. And so again, it was very minimal water treatment, relatively no testing, but there were also no regulations. Not until 1914 were there any federal regulations on our water supply. So there was really no guidance to go by. Not until 1923 was the Department of Health created in Tennessee. So, this was our system for a really long time. Nashville built its first filtration plant in 1929 at the George Ryer Pumping Station complex. That entire complex now is known as Omohundro, is still one of our 2 water treatment plants. So at that point, we were filtering water in a filter. We weren't just allowing it to settle. We were disinfecting it. And, at this point is when we started talking more about regulation and health and what was going in. 1970s, we had the Clean Water Act and Safe Drink Water Act that came into place. And then in 1978, we built our second water treatment plant, the K.R. Harrington Water Treatment Plant. So Nashville now has 2 water treatment plants. Both of them are rated at 90 million gallons per day. So we have ample water supply. We have about 3,000 miles of underground water main supplying this water. And our customers use approximately 110 million gallons a day. So with each plant being able to pump 90 million a day, we still have capacity. But water is something that is vital, and it's something that is precious, and it's something that we cannot make. What a lot of people don't always think about is water is something that we continually reuse, which is why our water reclamation facilities are so important, and protecting our source water, which is still the Cumberland River, is so important. As technology changes, again, not until 1908 were we treating water or really looking at water treatment at all, it has expanded enormously. Metro Water Services is sampling our water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are taking samples in the Cumberland River, our source. We're taking samples through the treatment process, and we're taking samples out into our community. So because we want to make sure that that water is treated properly, remains clean, and has a chlorine disinfectant when it gets out to the community, and everybody in our community has the same high quality water. So our 2 water treatment plants are what we consider sister plants. We don't have one portion of Nashville that gets water from Omohundro and one portion of Nashville that gets water from K.R. Harrington, which is a true blessing, because anyone that was here in 2010 knows that K.R. Harrington actually flooded during the May 2010 flood and had to be completely shut down. So for an entire month, our entire service area was supplied water with the Omohundro water treatment plant, which again was built in 1889. So it's quite amazing to think about that something that old was still able to provide our entire city with an ample supply of clean water. At no time did we have any violations or any boil water notices. So our operators did an amazing job. Both plants have the same treatment process. They are set up a little bit differently just because of the times they were built and the technology used, but we use a conventional water treatment. So when we bring water in from the Cumberland River, the first thing we want to do is take any of the larger debris out. So there is a screen that the water comes through. We want sticks and fish and any other debris that makes its way to the Cumberland River to stay in the Cumberland River and not be pulled into our facility. So once we bring that water in through that, it then goes into the first area where we start adding chemicals into it. We still use alum, and alum is used to help coagulate some of those smaller particles. We're wanting any of the dust-like particles that are suspended in water to become clumped together and heavier. So that is what we consider our coagulation and flocculation process. A flock is once they become together and they begin to settle out. So we're going to add our alum, we're going to allow the coagulation and the flocculation to occur. We're going to slow down the movement of the water so all of that mixing can occur. And then it goes into basically a settling basin. And we want any of those larger particles to truly settle out. We take the water off the top, very similar to what nature does and what we did in the 8th Avenue Reservoir, but we then put it through our filtration building. And the filtration process uses multiple layers of different material. It's larger rock, smaller gravel. We then have silica sand and even charcoal, very much like in the Brita filter. And we allow the water to filter through that. That takes up any of those small, minute particles that were remaining or the bacteria. We have disinfection with our chlorine. We now actually make our own bleach. For many years, Metro Water Services used gaseous chlorine, which we had to have brought in by trucks and or rail car. And as we know, that can be a true hazard, not only to our employees, but to the community. So we have now gone to a process where we make our own bleach, which is essentially a household chlorine. We use salt and water to make a brine. We put that through electricity, much like a saltwater pool. And so we are able to safely store salt. Water is readily available to us, and so we can make our bleach. So that really cuts down on the concern of being able to receive the chlorine. If there are any regulations on rail cars and hauling it, it cuts down on the risk to our employees and our community. And it's a product that we've been very happy with. So we are making our own bleach. It then goes into a clear well, which is a holding tank, and then all the way out to our reservoirs. Metro Water Services in our service area, anyone that lives in Nashville knows we have a lot of hills. So we have different pressure zones. And our 2 water treatment plants are what we call city low. And they pump from the water treatment plants through large 60-inch mains to our reservoirs. In Nashville, we've got 37 water reservoirs all around the county to help provide water. Water is pumped to these reservoirs by 56 different water pumping stations. So then we can use that water in the reservoirs to supply all of our community. With our 5 pressure zones, the lower reservoirs are filled up. We use those reservoirs to fill up the next level, those reservoirs to fill up the next level. We're constantly monitoring our reservoirs. We don't want water to sit in a reservoir for an extended period of time because water has a shelf life. And many people don't realize that we want our water to have a good chlorine residual. And if it sits for too long, just like anything else, it becomes stagnant, it becomes stale, and that chlorine residual dissipates. And as it dissipates or essentially evaporates, that allows bacterial growth. So we want our reservoirs to drain, and then we want to be able to fill them back up. So every morning and every evening, we are really monitoring those reservoirs, and we only fill them up based on what's needed. So we see clearly in the mornings when people are getting up, getting ready for school and work, we'll see a lot of water usage. So then in the afternoon, we fill it back up and prepare it for the evening when people are making dinner and giving kids baths. So we are really monitoring that on a daily basis to make sure that the water in Nashville is fresh water and it's a good high quality water. We are so fortunate here to have not only a good water source, it's a plentiful water source. Nashville has only had 1 water restriction in the entire time I've been here, and that was in 2010, and not because of a lack of water, but a lack of treatment ability. So we are not like other cities and states that have to, schedule when we can water our lawn and stagger the times that we use water. We are very fortunate to have a plentiful water supply. That doesn't mean we should waste it. We should truly consider wise water use. And one of the things that Metro Water Services did this past year to really encourage wise water use was to go to a tiered rate structure. So our customers historically had paid the same volumetric rate regardless of the amount of water they used. The people using water for essential services such as bathing and cleaning paid the same volumetric rate as people using water for irrigation and filling swimming pools. And so that meant there was no incentive to really reduce your water usage. And Metro Water Services had gone many years without a rate increase. So when we looked at our rate structure and the necessary rates, we decided to go with a tiered structure. So our customers, with their basic bill, they receive 0 to 200 cubic feet. And a CCF, or 100 cubic feet, is equivalent to 748 gallons. So they get about 1,500 gallons for free with their basic service. So that is, you know, the minimum that you pay, you get that amount. Then as you go from 2 CCF to 6, you're going to pay a higher amount. From 6 to 10, you pay a higher amount. And then those people that use 10 or more that are using 12 CCF, those are the people that are irrigating, and they're going to pay an even higher amount for that excessive use of water. So this is our way of really saying to people, you know, watch what you're using. We definitely want you to use water. We need to use water, but you know, really pay attention to how you're using that water, and are you letting it run while you brush your teeth? Are you letting the hose run in between washing your car? Are there ways that you can begin to really think about water, because not everyone is as fortunate as we are. So, you know, that is one thing that, you know, we've done, because we all need to really focus on water. I know that you talked about technology, and we've mentioned technology a lot. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, when, you know, the treatment plant was built, they were using the best technology available to them. They were using the best science available to them. So at the time, that treatment was sufficient. That was what was known. But as science has progressed and as technology has progressed, we know a lot more about water, and we know a lot more about treatment. And as that continues to progress and studies continue to move on, we see a lot of rising issues and concerns in water. The one that most people know about is lead, and that's not necessarily a new concern, but it's something that came to the forefront many years ago with Flint, Michigan. And in Flint, Michigan, they had multiple things going on in their system. And one of the biggest things was that they changed their water source and they changed their treatment process. And they didn't really look to the future and how that would affect everything. They, across the country, used lead pipe for many years. And again, at the time, that was the best available. You know, lead pipe was something that was inexpensive, it was sturdy, it was easy to use. So it was something that was used forever. And once they realized that lead was a concern, they started banning lead. So since the 50s, we've not been able to use lead in water. There was some lead soldering still, I mean, and now there is still a small amount of lead allowed in brass. So brass fixtures may still have a small amount of lead. But what Nashville did many years ago in the early 90s, 1992 to be exact, we started really looking at our pipes. And Nashville does not have lead water mains, but we do have lead service lines. And that service line is the small pipe that goes from the water main to each individual residence or business. So it's what's connected to the water meter, and it's what actually feeds your home. And that line is actually owned by the property owner. It's not a Metro Water Services line. It is a privately owned plumbing component. So we really couldn't force people to replace that. We couldn't pay to replace it because we would be getting on private property. So what we have been doing is having a very aggressive corrosion control program. We feed a polyorthophosphate into our water. And what that does is it provides a coating on the inside of pipes. And that coating, once it builds up on that pipe, does not allow any lead or other metals to leach out of water. When water sits in a pipe for an extended period of time, it can begin to absorb or leach metals out of that pipe. So once we have this coating, it not only protects our lines from rust and other metals being leached, but it protects the plumbing in people's homes from that occurring. So interior plumbing, if you have brass fixtures, all of that is protected. So when we have been doing our corrosion control program, like I said, since 1992, we have a very robust robust lead sampling program. And many years ago, because our lead numbers were so low here in Nashville, the state actually allowed us to go to a 3-year sampling plan. So Nashville only has to sample for lead every 3 years. And our numbers are extremely low. Our last sampling was actually done last year in 2019. And we are sampling now in parts per billion. Technology used to be able to sample in, parts per million, parts per trillion. Now we are sampling in parts per billion. And a part per billion is equivalent to 1 second in 32 years. So that is absolutely tiny. And when we look at all of our lead numbers and we take lead samples at homes that we know have lead plumbing and or lead soldering, so they are at the highest risk, we ask these individuals to not use the water for at least 8 hours, so we know that water has been sitting in the pipe. We take these samples during the summer months because when water is warm, it makes it easier for that lead to leach out of pipes. So we truly want to look at worst case scenario when we take these samples. And so we ask them after it's been sitting, typically overnight, before you flush, use any water at all, we want that first sample. So we take that first sample, and our lead numbers last year came out at 1.6 part per billion. So again, a part per billion is equivalent to 1 second in 32 years. The action level is 15 parts per billion. So Nashville is in great shape. We work very closely with our health department as well. And, I can truly say that lead is not something that Nashville should be concerned about. We hear about a lot of other things in the news regarding water. We hear about PFAS. We hear about microplastics. And a lot of these things are things that are not regulated. Water systems are not required to sample for them. There's a lot of research going on still to determine multiple things. Number one, what is the best sampling method? If it is in the water, what is the best treatment method? If it is in the water, what is healthy and what is not? Clearly, our water has minerals in it that come from the rocks and the substrate that are actually a benefit to us. It's actually minerals that we want to have in our water. And those we leave, but the things that we don't want in our water, the things that are harmful, are what we want to remove. So some of these other things are things that aren't regulated, but Metro Water Services still goes above and beyond. And even though we are not required to sample, we have been sampling for PFAS and we have been sampling for microplastics. And I'm really happy to say that neither have been found in our water, neither are a concern. We will continue to monitor it. We have sampled for pharmaceuticals in our water, even though it wasn't required. The only thing that we even got a hit on really was caffeine. So as technology increases and we have the ability to see things in much smaller quantities, and as science progresses and we learn about new things, this is always going to change. Science is always going to progress, and that's a good thing for us. But it can also be a bad thing because it's something that continually costs more money for sampling, for studies, but it's something that Metro Water Services is on top of and wants to remain on top of because we want to provide to our customers the highest quality water that they can get. Again, because the water coming from our treatment plants doesn't have lead. Lead gets in water by leaching out of pipes. And in the school system, the lead that found in their water came from some of the older plumbing and pipes in schools. We do have some really old schools in Nashville. I do have to acknowledge schools for doing a great job and being very proactive. Again, when they did the sampling, there were no requirements to sample at schools, and they could have very easily said, we're not going to sample, what we don't know won't hurt us. And they did not take that approach. They actually contacted Metro Water Services, they contacted the health department, and they sat in a room and said, this is a concern. We've seen what's been going on in Flint, Michigan, and other places, and we feel we should sample. What are your thoughts and your guidance? We provided them guidance and information from EPA and the CDC, and they chose to hire a contractor and do their own sampling. Again, Metro Water Services does not receive tax money. So all of our operations are done by our water and sewer ratepayers, which is one reason we can't do work on private property. It would be truly unfair for our customers to pay for their water service and that money go to improve private property or even to improve the schools, because the school system, they have their money, they're separate. So, but we are all still metro, and it is still one community. So we worked closely with schools in providing them the resources and guidance that we had and the information from EPA that we were able to provide to them. And again, I think it's phenomenal that they did the testing when they weren't required to. They did, again, in some areas where water was not used on a regular basis and water perhaps had been sitting there for long periods of time, or in some of their old schools where they had fountains, that they did find lead, and they started a plan to eliminate those. I do know that that plan is still moving forward. I do know that they are still on, a sampling plan, and, are going to be, especially after this closure and when schools do become, they're going to be doing more flushing. So again, one thing that everybody really needs to think about is, if you have lead, you really need to look at your internal pipes and what you can do. One of the things we have suggested to the schools is flushing. And that is one thing that we promote on our website and in our lead information that we provide to people, is if you live in an older home and, you're concerned about lead, if you've been on vacation or you've been out of town for the weekend, don't use water immediately that may have been sitting in the pipe. Open that cold water up, let it run so that water that was sitting in the pipe is flushed out and goes down the drain, and you're getting fresh water that has not been in contact with that metal for an extended period of time and able to absorb it. So I do know that schools will be doing quite a bit of flushing before they open schools back up, and they have a flushing plan after spring breaks and summer breaks. So again, I think it is a challenge for schools. They do have some old plumbing. They also have some financial concerns, but they are working toward it. Our drinking water has always been used for fire protection. Our drinking water, even today, is used for fire protection. Yeah. So the water coming out of fire hydrants is clean water that has been treated. We only have one set of pipes, and those fire hydrants are connected to pipes. If anyone's ever at a trivia tournament, I will give you a small piece of trivia. Years ago, fire hydrants were called fire plugs. And they were called fire plugs because in the original water system, those water lines were made out of wood. And if there was a fire, they would drill a hole in the wood pipe, dig a trench, and let the water flow out into the trench, and then use a bucket brigade to carry the water to the fire. Wow. They would then plug that hole, and they would mark it, showing that that was a fire plug. So if there was ever a fire in that vicinity again, rather than drilling a new hole, they would go to the, quote, fire plug. So I do know that I still have some elderly family members that still call them fire plugs. We now know of them as fire hydrants, but it is still the same concept. And, our water is used not only for, drinking and cleaning. It is used for fire protection. It is used for industry in, making the products that we use on a daily basis, not only our food at restaurants, but, rubber and tires. So water is important for the economy and industry in the city. It's important for the health of our community. And it's important for the safety of our community, not only as far as health, but also fire protection. I will say what's very interesting is, as Nashville has continued to grow, and we all know that Nashville has grown exponentially here recently, our water usage has not grown at the same rate. And that can truly be attributed to the fact that people are being more cautious with their water use. They are more aware of their water use. And so many of the newer homes are using low flow fixtures. So, anyone that has an older home knows that they have a toilet that has a huge tank, and toilets now use less water to flush. We have low flow fixtures in our showers and in our sinks. And I think over time, even though we have more people using water, those people are using water much more wisely. So, and that is definitely what we want to see. We want to see people, monitoring their water use, and we want to continue to see people use low flow fixtures, using cisterns to collect water during rains to water their gardens and flowers. So, there's a lot of options out there where we can really decrease our water usage. So as Nashville grows, our existing system is still able to provide what we need.
That's fantastic because we're not a stranger to fires at all. And it's a big part of our history. And so looking back during that time period you walked us through and understanding how potentially it took a long time to put those things out. You have to drill a hole every time you have to put a fire out. Some people are going to die, or the fire may spread. So having a viable water resource, that is clean, that is going to get the job done and accessible in whatever part of Nashville is just refreshing to know. In the event of emergencies, we're protected on that end. If we
We
need,
are.
clean water to drink or bathe or do whatever, we have it. And so that is what modern advancements will do, especially if you're familiar with where you've came from and where you need to go. I think that's going to improve as time, affords us the time to do that stuff. Okay, so I'd like for you to shed light on some of the futuristic things we're incorporating at Metro Waters. What about the actual, engineering technology behind it? What are some of the things we're involving at our plants, maybe?
Absolutely. One of the big projects that we'll be doing soon is some work on the historic 8th Avenue Reservoir. Again, it was built in 1889. It is on the historic register. Unfortunately, in 1912, it did break, and about 25 million gallons rushed down towards what we now know as the fairgrounds. It was repaired, but it has remained in service this entire time.
Okay.
Again, as I mentioned, we don't want water to stay in reservoirs too long. It has a shelf life. And with our additional reservoirs and the efficiency of our system, we found that we don't need 51 million gallons of storage at the 8th Avenue Reservoir. So we are currently only using one side of it. Because of the age of the walls, because of the infrastructure itself, we have a design to do a tank and tank, where we will essentially be building a concrete tank inside the historic rock reservoir walls. So we will have less storage. It will be designed better, so there will be more water movement, which will keep the water fresher much longer. And it's also going to be much safer. So we aren't going to have the risk of, a wall failure. We aren't going to have to monitor and be as concerned with water age in the reservoir. But what I'm also most excited about is, once complete, it will give us the opportunity to allow visitors to come tour this historic site. Currently, because our water system is so precious and, is the livelihood of our community, you could say, we don't allow tours at the reservoir. But once we have this tank and tank, it will be a much more secure site, and we'll be able to allow it. So that is one big project that we are working on. Hopefully it will be started later this year. It will be a lengthy project and it will be done in phases, but that is something that we will take our 1889 infrastructure, and while maintaining the historical integrity of it and that precious beauty that is part of Nashville's history, we will actually make it a new reservoir at the same spot inside that reservoir. So that is one exciting project we're doing. We're also starting later this year on a solar project. We have looked at the possibility of using solar panels and a solar array at several of our locations. We have plenty of areas with land. Electricity is one of our largest expenses here at Metro Water Services. So beginning later this year at our Whites Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant, we will begin putting in some solar. And hopefully we have a few other locations that we already have plans to move forward. So we are looking at solar as well, so we can reduce those energy costs and be much more sustainable. And something else that's very exciting is, last year we did a pilot program. And our pilot program looked at new technologies in water treatment. And that is really the use of ozone. So we set up a pilot plant. It was a mini water treatment plant at our K.R. Harrington Water Treatment Plant facility. And we looked at different technologies and how those technologies affected our water quality. We did this plant for an entire year. We did this project because we wanted to see if it was different in the spring than in the fall. Because our water source is the Cumberland River, it's always changing. So as water temperature changes, it affects treatment. As you have leaves falling into it during the winter that are decomposing and changing the water, that affects it. So the flow of the river affects it. So we didn't want to take a snapshot and it only be during the summer or during the winter. We did the entire project for an entire year. And so we now have all that year's worth of data, and we are looking at that to see if we need to make any changes in our treatment process to be more efficient and to really help with some of the upcoming concerns that we are aware of. And if this treatment can help alleviate any of the newer contaminants that they're seeing in water. So again, you never want to change your water treatment process. That's one thing that Flint, Michigan did without really looking forward. And that's something that Metro Water Services would not ever do. We want to see what other places have used. We want to see what works, what doesn't work. And even those things that do work, we want to see how that fits in with our water source and with our community before we make any changes. So that pilot program was very exciting. Again, we just finished at the end of last year. They're taking all of that data and looking to see where we might need to go in the future. So just like converting from gaseous chlorine to making our own bleach, we are constantly looking to the future. We are constantly looking at newer technologies and newer processes to make sure that we don't ever get behind the curve, and we're able to continue to stay with science and stay with technology to provide this water.
Nice. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And again, I'd like to thank you for coming on here and talking about the history of filtration here in Nashville. Is very key to being able to separate those minerals, identify them, reclaim the water that we need to reclaim, and reuse it, and advancing that along the way over time is only going to benefit us. So I appreciate all of the effort you guys are doing at the Metro Water Services, and you taking out the time to talk to me today. Guys, everything that we discussed, I'll provide a link to on my page at Urban Thread 615, and definitely check back here next month, and I'll have Miss Allman here to discuss another topic around water here. Like I always tell you guys, be blessed in every day that God gives you. Your life is full of purpose. Until next time, deuces.
Thank you.